Did you know that trying to think positive thoughts actually makes most people more negative? I spent years forcing myself to look on the bright side and stay positive, only to discover I was making myself worse. What I thought was helping me cope was actually causing stress, because continual denial of negative emotions creates the kind of tension that damages both mind and body. The fake positivity I was chasing backfired spectacularly, and that's when I learned there's a completely different way to rewire your brain for genuine positivity instead. Negativity bias, the cognitive tendency to prioritize negative stimuli, is hardwired into our brains and makes negative events feel more psychologically intense than positive ones. Think of your brain like a warehouse with an overzealous security guard. The amygdala, that almond-shaped early warning system deep in your brain, is particularly engaged during rapid processing of negative stimuli, directing your attention toward possible sources of danger. When I was forcing myself to think happy thoughts while my brain was screaming danger at every small setback, I was essentially trying to override millions of years of evolution. The harder I pushed against my natural wiring, the more my brain pushed back. That's the trap. The more you fight a negative thought, the more your brain resists, cementing it deeper. Instead of fighting my negative thoughts, I learned to just watch them without trying to change them. And that simple shift actually reduced their power. Think about it like being at a zoo. When you stand at the lion exhibit, you don't panic because there's glass between you and the danger. The practice of observing thoughts without judgment creates that same protective barrier. You can see the negative thought, acknowledge it's there, but you're not trapped inside the cage with it. Your rational brain gets stronger while your panic button gets quieter. The first time I tried this during a spiral of self-doubt, something remarkable happened. Instead of my usual internal argument of, "Stop thinking this way," I simply thought, "Oh, there's that familiar voice telling me I'm not good enough." The mental chatter didn't disappear, but it lost its grip, like turning down the volume on a radio that had been blasting. Have you ever tried that zoo trick I mentioned? Just watching your negative thoughts like they're behind glass instead of fighting them? Comment your answer below. Now, let me show you what happens when you take this observation technique to the next level. But here's where most people get gratitude wrong, including me for years. I'd dutifully write down 3 things I was grateful for each day: my health, my family, my job. Generic, broad things that felt like checking boxes. The problem was the format itself. I was forcing gratitude at the end of the day like a homework assignment, which meant my brain never actually learned to spot positives in real time. Then I discovered what I call micro-moment gratitude, finding one tiny thing that went right in just the last hour. Not the big stuff, but embarrassingly small wins. Like when I remembered to grab my keys before leaving, or when my coffee was actually the right temperature. Yesterday, my micro moment was that the elevator came immediately instead of making me wait. It sounds ridiculous, but catching these fleeting moments trains your brain to scan for positives as they happen, rather than manufacturing gratitude in retrospect. 5 years later, I discovered something that changed everything about my approach to reframing. The difference between asking, "How is this good?" versus, "What else could this mean?" That second question, neutral reframing instead of positive reframing, saved me from the toxic positivity trap I'd been stuck in for years. When my dad would criticize my career choices, I used to force myself to think, "He's just trying to help me succeed." But that felt like lying to myself because it wasn't necessarily true. Instead, I started asking, "What else could this mean?" and discovered multiple possibilities. Maybe he was projecting his own fears, maybe he genuinely didn't understand my field, or maybe he was having a bad day. Unlike simple positive thinking, this approach doesn't ignore or gloss over life's challenges. It seeks to locate a perspective that is both realistic and empowering. The relief was immediate because I wasn't forcing myself to believe something that might not be true. 3 months into practicing these techniques consistently, I noticed something shift in how my brain actually worked. Some days felt like massive breakthroughs, where I caught myself naturally scanning for micro-positives without even trying. Other days, I'd slip back into old patterns of catastrophizing about deadlines or replaying conversations on loop. The difference was that now I had tools that actually worked. When I noticed myself spiraling, I'd use the zoo trick to observe the thoughts, then ask, what else could this mean? Instead of fighting the spiral directly. The real victory wasn't that negative thoughts disappeared. It's that they lost their power to hijack my entire day. My brain was literally rewiring itself, and I could feel it happening. 3 months wasn't some magic threshold where everything clicked into place. It was the point where the rewiring became undeniable enough that I couldn't deny the shift anymore. Subscribe for more counterintuitive mindset shifts that actually work, and check out the productivity video next to see how these principles scale.